On the cold morning of 6 July 1945, Dwight D. Eisenhower sat alone, staring at a sealed envelope. The letter was about George S. Patton, a man Eisenhower had defended, restrained, and buried with silence. Patton was dead by accident, gone before the echoes of the war had fully faded, and the world was still arguing over his legacy. Eisenhower knew Patton better than anyone, both as a battlefield commander and as a problem that never rested. They had risen together through blood and mud, from North Africa to Europe, bound by victory and resentment. Now the war was ending, nations were counting graves, and history demanded an honest reckoning. Eisenhower had shielded Patton during scandals, apologized for him publicly, and doubted him privately. The soldiers loved Patton's fire, feared his temper, and paid for both with their lives. Politicians saw danger in his words. Journalists sharpened their knives, and allies watched nervously. When Patton died in Germany, December 1945, the silence felt unfinished. Eisenhower carried that silence home into memoir drafts and late-night reflections. What he would finally admit would reshape Patton's image, reveal Eisenhower's burden, and haunt American memory. Across a shattered world, victory parades mixed with mourning, while the truth waited its turn. This story begins not with tanks, but with a conscience wrestling with memory and command. In the quiet after war, Eisenhower faced Patton again, this time without armies. The admission would not come easily, because loyalty lingered and guilt cut deep. It would emerge years later, shaped by reflection and the weight of leadership. For now, the envelope remained closed, holding words unspoken and consequences unrealized. The truth Eisenhower carried back stretched all the way to February 1943. Under the African sun, Patton had just taken command in Tunisia, restoring discipline and fear almost overnight. Eisenhower watched the reports arrive, sharper movements, faster advances, higher casualties. Patton believed speed saved lives. Eisenhower believed balance preserved alliances, and both were right. Their partnership was never friendship, it was necessity, forged by crisis. When Patton struck a wounded soldier in Sicily, August 1943, Eisenhower faced an impossible choice: relieve his most effective battlefield weapon or protect a fragile coalition already straining under pressure. He chose containment, a public apology, private fury, and Patton's temporary exile. Behind closed doors, Eisenhower wrote that Patton was indispensable and dangerous. He knew Patton's instincts won wars, but his mouth could lose them. As Normandy approached, June 1944, Eisenhower hid Patton in plain sight. The Germans feared him, believed he led the invasion, and Eisenhower used that fear like a weapon. Patton became a ghost commander, misleading enemy intelligence, shaping victory without firing a single shot. Yet even success deepened Eisenhower's conflict, because manipulation replaced trust. When Patton finally broke loose in France, August 1944, devastation followed triumph. Entire German armies collapsed, but civilian towns burned and discipline frayed. Eisenhower praised Patton publicly, restrained him quietly, again and again. Each order carried admiration, frustration, and dread. By the time Germany fell, May 1945, Eisenhower was exhausted. He had won the war, but not the peace, with Patton. And Patton never learned restraint, even in victory. The reckoning Eisenhower postponed would return after death, when honesty felt safer. After Germany surrendered, 8 May 1945, Patton's war did not end. Stationed in Bavaria, he spoke freely, recklessly, comparing Nazis to communists. Eisenhower read the transcripts in Washington, each line tightening his jaw. The alliance with the Soviets was fragile, temporary, and dangerously tense. Patton's words threatened diplomacy at a moment when peace was still forming. Eisenhower removed him from Third Army. October 1945. Quietly and decisively. To Patton, it felt like exile, humiliation, and betrayal. To Eisenhower, it was the survival of a post-war order, barely standing. Letters passed between them, formal, restrained, and emotionally loaded. Patton asked for another command, another chance, another battlefield. Eisenhower refused, knowing Patton without war was combustible. Then came the accident, 9 December 1945, near Mannheim. A routine drive, a sudden truck, a broken neck. Patton lingered in a hospital, paralyzed, furious, fading. Eisenhower sent condolences, respectful, distant, final. When Patton died, 21 December 1945, the world mourned a warrior. Eisenhower mourned something more complex, a weapon he wielded and contained. Publicly, he praised Patton's genius, courage, and battlefield brilliance. Privately, he began writing truths never spoken aloud. In early drafts of his memoirs, Eisenhower admitted deep misgivings. He wrote that Patton's aggression bordered on obsession and risked moral collapse. These lines were softened, edited, delayed. America wanted heroes, not contradictions. Yet the admission waited, like an echo. Patton's death removed fear of backlash, but not responsibility. Eisenhower knew history would ask, what did he really think? Years passed, and Eisenhower carried Patton into peace and politics. By January 1953, Eisenhower entered the White House, burdened by memory. The Cold War hardened, alliances shifted. And Patton's warnings echoed uncomfortably. Privately, Eisenhower reread old letters, reports, and battlefield logs. He saw Patton's brilliance again, but also the costs ignored. In quiet conversations, Eisenhower admitted Patton had frightened him. Not as an enemy, but as a force barely controlled. He said Patton loved war more than peace, more than consequence. This was not said publicly, not yet, but to aides and trusted historians. Eisenhower described Patton as necessary and intolerable at the same time. The admission cut deeper because Eisenhower had enabled him. He protected Patton, exploited his reputation, and absorbed his damage. Leadership, Eisenhower realized, was choosing which sins to carry. Patton's death froze him in legend, charging forward, eternal. But Eisenhower saw the men behind the myth, insecurities. Obsession, a hunger for glory. He wrote that Patton needed war like oxygen. Without it, he unraveled, lashed out, and ultimately self-destructed. Eisenhower delayed publishing these thoughts, fearing backlash, misunderstanding, and division. America was building monuments, not arguments. Still, the truth pressed forward, demanding daylight. In private notes, Eisenhower finally wrote that he would never command Patton again. Not because of incompetence, but because of instability. This was the admission, restrained but devastating. It reframed Patton from savior to risk. And it left Eisenhower with a question: had victory been worth the cost? The admission did not surface immediately, it leaked slowly, through memory. By the late 1950s, historians were combing Eisenhower's private papers. They found margins heavy with doubt, sentences carefully crossed out. Eisenhower explained that Patton's success had masked chaos. He said Patton won battles, but strained unity and endangered civilians. These were not accusations, but confessions of command. Eisenhower recalled nights before offensives, worrying less about the Germans and more about Patton. A single remark, a single slap, could unravel the entire strategy. The burden of controlling Patton, Eisenhower admitted, drained him. He described Patton as a storm, powerful, unpredictable, unstoppable. You did not aim a storm, Eisenhower wrote. You redirected it, and prayed. This metaphor revealed Eisenhower's fear and respect, intertwined. When he finally allowed parts of this to be published in revised memoirs, he softened the language. He framed Patton as a product of war, not peace. Yet one sentence remained untouched. Eisenhower wrote that Patton was unsuitable for long command in a modern world. That line shocked veterans, historians, and admirers alike. It suggested Patton might have failed after victory. Eisenhower did not explain further, because explanation would wound. He believed Patton's legend needed preservation, even if the truth suffered. Silence carries a cost, and history always collects its debt. The question lingered: had Eisenhower loved Patton, or used him? Perhaps both, and perhaps neither entirely. The final reckoning still waited. As the 1960s approached, Eisenhower grew reflective and unguarded. The world had changed. Nuclear weapons replaced divisions, and restraint had become a matter of survival. In interviews after leaving office, Eisenhower spoke more freely, carefully, but honestly. He acknowledged that Patton belonged to a different age, a violent and necessary one. Eisenhower said Patton understood motion, shock, and fear better than politics ever could. This was praise, but also a limitation. He admitted Patton could not adapt once enemies became allies. The general who crushed Germany could not manage Germany. Eisenhower felt responsible for unleashing and containing such a man. He compared Patton to a sword, unsheathed too long. Victory dulled its edge, and it could cut the wielder. These reflections were not bitterness, they were warnings. Eisenhower believed future leaders had to learn from Patton's flaws, not just his victories. He worried America might romanticize aggression without accountability. Patton's story, stripped of nuance, could inspire danger. Eisenhower wanted balance restored, courage with conscience, power with restraint. Patton had mastered none of these, except courage. This admission reframed heroism away from spectacle and toward responsibility. Yet Eisenhower never denied Patton's impact. He said that without Patton, the war would have lasted longer and cost more lives. This contradiction defined Eisenhower's truth. Patton was essential and unacceptable. The men who won wars could not win peace. Eisenhower lived with that paradox until his final years. Only then did he accept that honesty mattered more than legend. By the time Eisenhower reached his final years, memory had softened, but clarity had sharpened. He spoke to historians in quiet rooms, his voice low and deliberate. They asked about Patton again, and Eisenhower paused. Silence, he said, was once necessary, but truth eventually demands air. Eisenhower admitted Patton had scared civilians, allies, and even his own staff. Fear could motivate armies, but it could also corrode trust. He recalled moments when Patton ignored orders, chasing glory. Each time, Eisenhower weighed victory against catastrophe. This balancing act defined supreme command. Eisenhower confessed that Patton had forced him to become political. Not out of ambition, but out of the need to preserve a fragile coalition. Without restraint, the alliance could have fractured, and the war might have been lost. Patton never understood that layer of war. He fought enemies, not consequences. Eisenhower said this limitation was Patton's tragedy. A brilliant weapon forged for one purpose. Once that purpose passed, the weapon became dangerous. Eisenhower rejected conspiracy theories surrounding Patton's death. He called them comforting lies, avoiding the harder truths. Patton died as he had lived, fast, exposed, vulnerable. What mattered, Eisenhower said, was how he was remembered. Not as a saint, nor a villain, but as a man shaped by violence and rewarded for it. Eisenhower hoped future generations would see that complexity. Hero worship, he warned, blinds judgment. And blind judgment invites disaster. After Eisenhower's death, March 1969, the record began to widen. Private tapes, notes, and interviews entered the archives. Together, they painted a clearer portrait of restraint confronting ferocity. Historians noticed Eisenhower's language shift over the decades. Early praise gave way to caution and moral distance. He never denied Patton's courage, but he framed it as a symptom, not an anomaly. Modern war, he believed, created men like Patton, and then discarded them. This insight haunted Eisenhower. He questioned whether leaders had a duty to protect such men from themselves. Patton's death, sudden, brutal, prevented that reckoning. Eisenhower felt the absence deeply. He wondered if firmer discipline or earlier removal might have saved Patton, or if war inevitably consumed him. These reflections carried regret, but no absolution. Eisenhower accepted his role in shaping the legend. He allowed Patton to become myth because America needed symbols. Symbols simplify. Truth complicates. As Vietnam approached, Eisenhower's warnings felt prophetic. He feared another generation would chase aggressive heroes into catastrophe. Patton's story, stripped of nuance, became dangerous inspiration. Eisenhower wanted balance restored. Courage, with conscience. Power, with restraint. Only then could history honor Patton honestly. The final admission was not condemnation, but caution. By the early 1970s, the debate erupted publicly. New biographies challenged Patton's legend and quoted Eisenhower directly. Readers were shocked, not by criticism, but by its source. The man who had shielded Patton now revealed his limits. Eisenhower's words carried weight because they carried responsibility. He never denied Patton's courage or battlefield genius. He denied the idea that genius excused everything. Veterans responded with anger, grief, and reflection. Some felt betrayed. Others finally understood the complexities of command. The myth fractured, revealing a human outline. Eisenhower's admission reshaped military education. Officers studied Patton alongside restraint and ethics. Leadership was no longer speed alone, it became judgment. This shift mattered because future wars demanded control. Patton became a case study, not a template. Eisenhower believed that was justice. He wanted Patton remembered whole, not polished. In lectures, historians echoed Eisenhower's warning: admiration must never silence accountability.
The admission reshaped American memory. Patton remained iconic, but no longer untouchable. Eisenhower's honesty, late but deliberate, closed the gap. It allowed history to breathe. The war's heroes became men again. And with that, the story neared its end in the quiet of late summer. August 1970, Eisenhower reflected one last time. He had lived through wars, commanded millions, and carried the weight of nations. Patton lingered in memory, not as legend, but as a man, brilliant, reckless, and human. Eisenhower admitted, finally, that protecting him had been both duty and danger. He had shielded a friend, restrained a weapon, and managed a personality that could have unraveled the fragile. Victory they fought to win. In his writings, he emphasized courage, but paired it with caution, brilliance with accountability. He understood that history often simplifies heroes, but leadership is measured in nuance. Patton's name would endure: thunderous speeches, cinematic depictions, statues in marble. But Eisenhower wanted the truth preserved, not to diminish the soldier, but to honor the responsibility of those who command. He admitted that genius alone is not enough. It must be guided, tempered, and, when necessary, restrained. The confession was neither easy nor comfortable, but it was necessary. It revealed a paradox. Patton had shaped the war, but Eisenhower had shaped the man who shaped it. Eisenhower's final note was clear, deliberate, and haunting. History remembers deeds, but wisdom remembers the cost. The world would never forget Patton's victories, nor the ferocity of his spirit. But thanks to Eisenhower's honesty, generations could also remember the dangers of unchecked brilliance and the quiet burden of those who hold the reins. In the end, Eisenhower's admission did not diminish Patton. It completed him as both hero and human in full complexity. The war had ended decades ago, yet its truths, unspoken, restrained, and finally confessed, still reverberated, shaping memory, legacy, and the fragile art of command.